I'm pumped. I'm excited about today's episode, guys.
I think, yeah. I mean, what a guest.
I'm excited.
I mean, this person that we have lined up is like, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
Our biggest guest to date. They are one of, I would go out on a limb and say one of the top producers, recording engineers, personalities.
Yeah.
In the recording world today.
I mean, when you look at the list of credits that he's worked with, it is ridiculous.
It really is. And I'm really fascinated to hear, I know that it's not an interview, so we're not going to go too in depth, but I'm just fascinated to hear sort of like how he thinks about these projects, how he approaches these things, because it's not small potatoes, right? These are big names that he's worked with. Yeah, I'm really excited to hear what our guest has to say today about what we're going to talk about, Ben. What's the subject of today's conversation?
So the topic for today is, are you mixing before you ever touch a fader? The process before mixing is really important. Some might say more important than what happens in the actual mix. And we're going to be able to speak, hopefully, with them about, the topic, just sort of get their thoughts on, should you start mixing? Do you start mixing before you ever open a mix session? Does mixing start in recording? Does it matter if you're in the box or going through hardware? All these kind of thing of when does it start for him?
Is that mixing like with, or is that producing and recording with the mix in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
sure. Yeah. That's really how it should always, well, I guess I shouldn't say that's how it should always be approached, but that's the ideal, right?
I feel like it should be that way, because
when I'm writing a song, when I'm thinking of guitar parts, I want the guitar to sound good, but I'm also thinking a couple steps ahead at the same time. Like, okay, I want to have 4 or 5 guitars, right? So now I need to think about 4 or 5 unique sounds that complement each other, or maybe 4 sounds that complement each other and one that doesn't. So it kind of like sticks out a little bit, so you're kind of thinking about the mix, the balance of things before you really ever pull a guitar down off the wall, right? And plug it in.
But how often
that's how I try and think about it.
But how often have we heard, "Oh, don't worry about it, we'll fix it in the mix"? I mean, it used to be a thing I heard all the time.
That was the going mode of operation, I know, when I was starting out.
Exactly.
And that was great for somebody coming in, because it took this complete other context of thinking out of the picture.
Yeah, all the pressure.
Right? I don't have to think. I don't have to think about the mix. I don't have to think about any of this stuff. I can just hit record and I can fix it later. Well, guess what?
Mm-hmm.
You can't.
There's no fixing it later. You can't.
No.
You really cannot fix it later.
And you could find all the tips and tricks you want on YouTube. Watch this, watch that tip, watch that tip. And they're cool tricks and, things that you can do to get like what you want to happen. But who was it that said you can't fix a turd, right? Is that the saying?
Yeah.
Well, you can't polish it.
You can't polish a turd. You can't
polish a turd.
If you can only roll it in glitter.
Yeah. So
you can only roll it in glitter. Yeah, right. Exactly.
I mean, if you're recording all these instruments and they're all like fitting in this one space, like trying to carve out space later it's going to be a nightmare for you. It's going to be a nightmare for the engineer who's mixing it. You should think about those things ahead of time.
Yeah, it really is going to be. You're not going to have a good time. It's not going to be fun, and I think that is going to be a big takeaway. I hope today is that part of the conversation about not only just getting it right at the source, because there's a whole bunch of things that happen even before you do that, right? Mm-hmm. It's having a good arrangement. It's the production value of the song. What's not playing when the solo is happening? What's not playing when the vocalist is singing the verse, right? So restraint, pulling back the instrumentation. It's awesome to have this huge stereo image of all these things happening. But if it's detracting from the vocals, then simply turning up the vocals is not going to fix that problem, right? So now it's cutting out things and thinking about the production value of things. So that's really getting the song right before you hit record, and that's thinking of things with the mix in mind.
Yeah, and I've always done it.
And there's way more to it than that, right? That is that is very small part of it.
And even as I'm recording, like, I will have those tracks available for me to play against what I'm recording now, just to kind of like see, well, does it fit? Does this tone fit? You know, if you've already got the drums recorded and you already have the bass recorded or whatnot, and you're going in and recording guitars, why wouldn't you record, you know, and then like just real quick check against what instrument you have already there? Just quick check. Yeah.
And don't be afraid to bring a different pair of ears in, you know, share it with a friend. Ask them, hey, what do you think about what you hear? Because you're going to lose perspective as you go along. So get someone else's opinion before you go down a path and, you know, you've invested too much and you can't go back.
And don't be afraid to try other microphones, other recording techniques, maybe, you know.
Well, that's assuming somebody has microphones to choose from, right?
That's true.
So a lot of people
have
1, 2, maybe 3 mics, you know, especially bedroom producers, you know, they have 2-channel interface. So that's all they can work with.
But there's always a way to do like a second type of tone, right? So like even if you have one mic position, different tone on the guitar, maybe blending a clean tone with a dirty tone. You know, try maybe even bringing an acoustic guitar in and blending those. You know, trying different things to get the tone that is right for the song.
Well, we're getting way ahead of ourselves.
I know we
here.
are.
So I think what we'll do is let's play the intro, and then we'll come back and we'll introduce today's guest, and we'll get this conversation going about how to think about the mixing process before you ever load up a DAW, before you ever touch a fader. Okay, let's go. Hi, and welcome to Sound Discussion. Each episode, we discuss a music topic which we have all had first-hand experience with. This will be anything from getting started, recording, playing live, mixing, mastering, and everything in between. Most episodes, we will have a special guest to bring their professional experience to the discussion. So, let's get started.
This month's guest needs no introduction to anyone who is a fan of music or makes music in any way, but here we go. He was born just down the road from me. That's not relevant to anyone but me. In England, and is best known as a multi-platinum producer for the Fray, Daniel Powter, Trevor Hall, Korn, James Blunt, Ace Frehley, and a slightly less well-known band called Aerosmith. His films and television credits include Inglourious Basterds, Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen, MTV's The Hills, Lost, Scrubs, and Grey's Anatomy. He's the owner of Spitfire Studio in Los Angeles, and when not working with massive international artists, he spends a large amount of his time helping musicians via Produce Like a Pro, his online community and training materials. With over 750,000 subscribers and 2,500 videos, the Produce Like a Pro YouTube channel is an incredible source for free material, ensuring that everyone can learn from the best and improve their songwriting, production, mixing, and mastering. We are so excited to welcome this month's guest, Warren Huart.
Yeah, you're very, very kind. You made me sound interesting.
Wow.
I think that resume is definitely interesting. Yeah, I think that's what you can call that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for making me sound interesting. Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
I think for all of us, probably we probably all watch you on YouTube on a regular basis because the depth and breadth that you cover is incredible. You know, it's everything from is this plugin good to how do I record a guitar to can I record a Beatles song like the Beatles to, I mean, it's vast. And that's why when we knew you graciously said you were coming on, it was like, oh my God, what do we talk about? Because the man, he does everything. We could talk about anything.
You're very kind. That's very kind of you. It is interesting, because I was thinking about this the other day. Over the last kind of like month or two, we've been doing a lot of like short form video stuff and going back through the tips and tricks, because those do really, really well. So we've been doing a lot of that, and we've been putting a lot of stuff kind of, creating a lot of back catalogue. So we can have frankly, an Easter break between all of us. Just wanted to actually have some time off. Because, got family, and it's great to be able to do some stuff with the kids. And I was just thinking about all of the content and stuff, and what, I saw somebody do a video on a breakdown of a song, and they recut the song, and then they explained how, how difficult these are, and they take a month to do, and all this kind of stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, we used to do like 2 of those a week. There was a point when Eric and I were like, we have to do a cover. Let's bring in a singer. Let's record it now. And we would just record a song from scratch. And I remember Blair Sinter would come in, and we'd be doing like the 1 mic drum kit or something like that, and put the mic over the floor, pointed between the kick and the snare, track the drums. He'd be in and out in 20 minutes. He'd play it down 1.5 times, literally. And then I'd put the bass line down, and then, do some electric guitar. We'd already have an acoustic guitar vocal. We'd always start off with the singer, get that. And by the end of the day, and then any editing I had to do, clean up stuff, not much, but whatever I could do, and then mix it and film the whole thing in a day. And that was like, and then, Eric would Eric would sometimes edit late that night, because we'd have to get videos out for the next day. And we used to do like these, 19-hour days and get a thing out. And I was just thinking, God, a month. I was like,
it's a luxury.
Like, God bless you.
How often did you release videos?
We were doing 5 a day in those days.
5 a day.
Yeah. And we've only had a few weeks now we've had about 2 or 3 weeks of doing three a week. But typically speaking, we do 2 shorts a day and 5 videos a week. So it's, and 2 shorts a day, 7 days a week. So 19 videos a week.
Wow. That's a full-time job.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, it is a full-time job, but
if you're doing it by yourself, well, you've got a team though, right? Yeah,
we have a small team. We don't have a particularly big team. We've been through more people, less people, and we try different stuff. That's the thing about, doing this wonderful digital world is you're always evolving and changing. The thing for me, though, the number one thing is that wind's going crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I heard that one.
Really windy here. The thing for me is that I never want to stop making music. And what concerns me, because I know a lot of people who do YouTube stuff don't really make that much music, and they use YouTube, to sort of like further their career in music. I come from exactly the opposite place. I was working 18 hours a day, 6-7 days a week, up until and including doing YouTube for the first few years. So me and an intern started doing all the video stuff, and he would show up at 9 a.m. and from 9 to 11 we'd make a video, and then he'd go back and edit it, and we'd put it up the next day. And we did that 3 to 5 days a week for the first year. And I think he stayed. He became a full-time employee, of course, but he stayed for like the first 2.5 years. And those first 2.5 years, that's what we did. And then I'd work from 11 to 11 at night and making records. And sometimes it was albums, sometimes it was a combination of EPs and singles and writing sessions. I just got an email from somebody yesterday, a country artist who's fairly well known, and we'd written a song together in 2013. And it just made me think about what was I doing then. So I went and I found the song. It's before I started YouTube, but I found the song, and then I found an email chain like during the period of while we were doing YouTube of remixing the track, adding some stuff. And I'm thinking, I remember doing that. I remember the day I did that. I was making a video about a microphone, recording an artist, recalling a mix, cutting in an acoustic guitar, printing some stems for an Aerosmith track, yeah, my first blog I ever wrote wasn't until 2015, and I just saw it today because I was talking to Matt, who one of my friends, Matt, and I read it. I almost want to read it to you guys because it was just like, I can't believe what used to be normal. And normal now is absolutely nuts. Don't get me wrong. It's totally nuts. I think I told you off camera what we've already done today. My first ever blog is July 2015. I didn't have a website when we first started. And it's called, the blog is called A Summer's Day in Laurel Canyon. And I wrote, it's 10 a.m. Today began with a bang. Billy Sheehan, bass player with Mr. Big, Steve Vai, UFO, David Lee Roth, Talis, and the Whining Dogs is coming into my studio to record bass on 2 songs. On drums that we tracked at Sunset Sound with Kenny Arnoff. And I started talking about the mic pre's and stuff. And then, then I stopped writing and I go and work. And I wrote, Billy arrived on time, Yamaha signature bass, and then we started talking about things. I filmed a video with him for like half an hour while he was there thinking, hey, do you mind if I film a video with you, Billy, and talk about your bass? So we did that. That went up on the channel. I described what gear I was using. I said the second song, first and second song, I said next on the agenda, this is at 1 p.m. So he came in at 11. Now, at 1 p.m. was an artist called Brendan McMorrow, a Canadian artist. And I said, we had 3 songs that needed acoustic and scratch vocals before going to record a choir tonight. So then in that evening, I go to, I think, Santa Monica or somewhere. I bring in a bunch of studio gear, some mic pre's, a whole bunch of microphones, and record a choir for her album.
Crazy
so that was
day.
the one day. Billy Sheehan, come in, do some vocals and acoustic guitars, and then get in a car and drive to it was actually a yoga studio to do a choir in a yoga studio. And that was all in one day. And I remember thinking when I wrote that, I was just talking about a normal day. And now I look at it, and I was doing that and filming between 9 and 11. So between 9 and 11, I'd filmed a video. Then Billy came in from 11 till 1, and I filmed a video with him there while tracking based on 2 songs. Because 2 hours for Billy Sheehan to track songs is nothing. I mean, he probably did it in 45 minutes and still had time to, to have a cup of tea and a cigar. I don't think he smoked cigars. I just thought it sounded good. And then Brendan McMorrow comes in, and we cut acoustic guitars and vocals, and then we go and do a choir in a yoga studio, which I think was like an hour away. And I talked about these mics that nobody knew about at the time. I said I loaded a pair of Lewitt 550 mics, and that was before I even was talking about Lewitt microphones, and because I bought them because I wanted a pair of 414s, and a couple of my friends said, "Don't go out and buy a pair of AKG 414s. They're bloody $1,200 or $1,400 each, and just buy one of these." And they gave me one to try out. And I put it up, beat it with a 414, and I thought it sounded better. And it was like a third of the price. So I bought a pair of those, So, yeah, when you ask about, talk about when it started and all that stuff, I mean, that's what it was like, yeah.
When you're when you're preparing for a session,
yep.
Like let's say the next, for something that's coming up tomorrow and you're thinking about it, the artist, kind of what to expect. Maybe you've worked with them before. How much of the pre-planning that you're doing is thinking about, the instrumental elements, so instead of just saying, okay, mic's up, we're rolling, play, you're also before then thinking about like, how many guitars are we going to have? Where are they going to be placed in the stereo spectrum? What other elements, like the pre-mixing process before you even hit record? How much of that is going through your head?
It's all the same thing. It's a good question. I have no problem. First of all, what I'm going to say is I don't have any problem with morphing and changing anything at any time. Being inflexible in music is a complete disaster, So whatever I say here can change at any second. However, I always start off with a vision. And it's not something that I sit there and think about for 3 days and analyze. And it's guttural. It is guttural. The first thing, I had an artist write to me earlier today. I won't say who it is, but they wrote to me and they said, want to do more of a pop punk album this time. Would you be interested in producing it? So I said, sure, when do you want to do it? And they said sometime this year. I was like, great, that's music to me, because we can fit it around all the other thousands of things we do. So that's exciting. And then the second thing I said was, okay, I want to hear some demos. I don't care if it's a vocal, acoustic, or full blown, or anything in between. I just want to hear something just so I can visualize what it's going to sound like. And it's very guttural. I'm a huge fan of music, as you were lovely saying off camera, how I cover all things and all genres. I'm a fan of music, and I've said it a million times. I love the Duke Ellington quote. There's only two types of music, good and bad. And so for me, it's like I can listen to something and go, this is punk rock a la crass anarchist punk. Or it could be pop punk a la Green Day. Or it could be, somewhere in the middle, Clash kind of punk. It could be, early, it could be, pre-punk, kind of proto-punk, Iggy Pop, kind of in the Stooges. I love it all. But at the same time, if you want to talk about Mozart and Beethoven and Bach and Shostakovich and Tchaikovsky, and I'll do that all day as well. I love classical music. I grew up on classical music, and my dad was the hugest classical music and jazz buff. So I grew up on Wes Montgomery and Charlie Christian and Django Reinhardt and Joe Pass with Ella Fitzgerald, those live albums. Woo, amazing. So I just love music. And because it's really, just ask my wife, the only thing I'm good at, because it's the only thing I'm good at, it's the only thing I'm really passionate about. Well, that's not entirely true. I'm passionate about art in general and of the creativity, but it's easy for me, or easy is a wrong word. It's where I feel most natural. When somebody sends me something, I visualize it. I have a really clear idea of how we're going to do it, and to your point, I've already figured out what the mix is going to be like. And I'm not talking about boosting 3K here or dipping whatever. What I'm talking about is, like, I know how I want it to sound. And my reference points are always classic pieces of music. And because to me, I just want it to be as good as, the stuff that we all hold up in the highest regard. So always, yeah. To me, you're making the video. And I think it was Dave Jordan said to me, actually, and Jack Douglas said this as well, great producers I engineered for, saying, when they were doing songs, they've got all a visual aspect to it, and they encourage the artist to think that way as well. Think about, like, if you had a video for this song, who would be in it? What would they be doing? Is it, that can really help in many, many ways. And I love all that kind of stuff.
So there's something I was just going to say, there's something you said there. You have like an instinctive, almost immediate feel for what the mix, the sound of that track or album is going to be like. So as soon as you're getting into recording, are you immediately recording with that final sort of...
I love to commit, yeah. I love committing. And I love committing big fat tones, I talked about this recently, but I did at AES before, I think either right at the beginning of YouTube or before, about 10 years ago. Jonathan Pines, great Jonathan Pines, asked me to come in and do a presentation and play a track by the Fray. So I played You Found Me. And I pulled it up on faders, as it were, in the big hall. And I played them my rough mix from a Pro Tools session, just like, levels, all this, panned all around, and there was no plugins on it. And then I played the mix, Michael Brower's mix, and I was like, what do you guys think? And everybody's like, I think I prefer your rough, because it just sounded massive. But obviously there's a thing when you take tracks where you have to skinny them down, you have to do some high passing, but there wasn't much of that needed because everything was committed. I love committing. I love being able to get in there and just like shape a sound and make a decision on the part, and then make a decision on the sound. So the next time, if you want to add a part, you know what you're lacking or where it could go or what it would support, etc. But at the same time, not all parts need to be to need to be heard. I remember having a joke with Graham and Joe, actually. I think it was on something that we did, where they had done a video in one of their joint things where they were like, everything needs to be heard in a mix. And I was like, guys, it doesn't need to be heard. Some sounds support other sounds. A classic example, if you don't know, I'm sure you all know this, but if you don't know, it's a great one. Heavy guitars. When you've got the ground, every rock guy worth his salt will put octave pianos on it. Dong, 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 dong. Big, low octaves. Bring it up so you can actually hear the piano, and then duck it down a couple of dB. You can no longer discern it, but it adds thickness and weight behind the heavy guitars. So there's that sort of common misconception in mixing that everything needs to sort of be in a place and fit here and be a sort of jigsaw puzzle where, I remember working with Dave Jordan. He would do so much cool stuff. It was it was like going to work in the studio with him was just like every day was a party. I'd go in there and we would track acoustic guitars, and we'd get out a J45 and he'd stick a mic on it, beautiful J45. And then he had a pickup put in the J45. So he'd take a cable out, go into a DI box, print like the most generic DI, then also send it into a guitar amp and run pedals and mic up the amp, and just with all of these elements create the most exciting guitar sound you've ever heard in your life. Every day was like that. What can we do? Oh, let's try something different. What should we do here? Working with Joe Perry was the same. I've said this many times, so you can feel free to glaze over because I tell this story all the time. But on that track, Legendary Child, it's like this huge guitar sound where you had a full-blown Marshall stack, full Marshall stack, two cabs in my live room, cranked, like everything pinned at 10. Close miking the amp with a Royer 122V. They just brought them out. Wonderful mic, which was perfect for Joe because he's so bright. His guitar sound was like rip your head off bright. So the 122V would just, round off the highs beautifully. That paired with, I think it was a 421, but anyway, a dynamic. So those two together blended. Then the room mic'd in stereo. Then I had a champ in the other room, which was mic'd with a Sontronics ribbon, and that was cranked in a smaller room. And then we took the DI from the guitar and went through an Arbiter fuzz face, and then from that into a Neve mic pre and cranked the mic pre to 10. So you have that kind of, and that's the guitar sound. So the guitar sound is like full-blown Marshall stack in a room mic'd up, small amp, champ overloaded, mic'd up, DI in a fuzz face, going into the Neve crank, so you got the Jimmy Page kind of thing, and blending all that together. And it took us a good few hours to get this sound exactly the way he heard it in his head. And once we got the sound, we did the riffs, and we were like super, super excited, thinking, what song are we going to go to next with this amazing guitar sound? And of course, he's Joe Perry. He doesn't think that way. He's here to enjoy it. So he's like, cool, we did that part. Now let's get a different sound. And you realize, well, that's his job. He's a guitar player,
Yeah, right.
But us engineers think, well, we've got this amazing guitar sound. Let's use it everywhere. And he's like, nah.
He's like, that was just the warm-up.
Yeah, that's just for this one part. Yeah.
Right.
I made the mistake of telling him about, and I say this jokingly, I made the mistake of telling him about Jeff Beck on Ain't Superstitious, that really kind of this really fat tone. I had heard that Jeff Beck had put a Marshall stack in a cupboard with a thin door and probably air all around it, but admittedly put it in a cupboard and then cranked it and mic'd the outside of the door. That's why it goes. It's like this huge dark guitar sound. So I made the mistake of telling him that. And he's like, we should do that. So we got a Marshall Major, a 200-watt head. So so loud, a Marshall Major and a double Marshall stack, and put it in the cupboard door in my studio and closed the door and mic'd the door. And then we came to mix it. And this album went on for a long time. So Neil Avron mixed the first half of the album and I mixed the second half of the album because he was mixing while I was still tracking. And then the second half of the album, I was, whatever. But the first half, we'd already tracked this song, and I'm trying to remember what it was. Anyway, we have this song, and we bring it up. We bring it over, drive over with the hard drive and give it to Neil. And we would sit there. He would like work. But no, I'd given him that song the night before. So when we came back the next night, he'd already been working on it all day. And he said to me, he goes, Warren, what is with that guitar sound? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, it is massive. It is so big. He goes, if I pull it in like the way you guys have done it, nothing else is audible. Because it was just like so thick. It was like just low end, low mids, and we had
every guitarist's dream.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just like I can't remember what the riff was. It was probably just like a classic kind of but it was like and it was just like he goes, we could put that in and not have a bass. We could,
just fire the rest of the beat.
Yeah, because it was like kick, snare, and that guitar. That was about all you could get in the mix. Maybe with some overheads just shimmering over the top. But it was such a massive, massive guitar sound. Because it was like what we did is we went into the Marshall Major and cranked all the high end max because we were trying to get some high end to come through the door. Luckily, there was some kind of gaps, So we're trying to get all of that at the same time as getting all of the massive low end that was just leaking through this door. It was pretty comical, but those are the reasons. The DI, the pedals, the going through whatever, all of this stuff we're talking about, all these multiple miking ideas and stuff. That's the reason why we do this. So if we're not committing this, and you're just like I'm going to use my DI with my virtual preset 3. I mean, you can do it, and it works. And sometimes I do. Sometimes it is the best thing, but I think. I love the magic. I love the going into the studio for as long as you possibly can, obviously decreasingly long times these days through budgets, but just going in there and doing all of this stuff.
I think you said it does work. Sometimes it does work your preset 3.
Of course.
But where's the fun in it? Where's the enjoyment of creating that unique sound
in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you sit there afterwards, like I can tinker with it for however long afterwards. Like you've just got so many options and stuff like that.
Did you guys see the short? Sorry to interrupt you, Neil. Did you see the short where somebody was like saying, why do you need real amps anymore? And they had like the virtual amp, which was like, and then they played a live guitar and it was like, and it got 1 million views. It's like all that video told me is that the guy who made the video doesn't know how to record guitars.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But everybody's like, yeah, you see, you don't need them. It's like, oh, no, it was like, does this sound better? What virtual amps sound better? It's like, virtual amps are amazing. I actually don't dislike them at all. I was using Amp Farm before it was, we were using Amp Farm in like 97, 98, 99 when it first came out. The Americana is a blend of Amp Farm, Offspring's Americana is a blend of Amp Farm guitars with live amps, and we blended them together, and that's why those guitars sound massive. There's so much benefit to you, and that's 26 years ago. 26 years ago, virtual guitars were being used on massive selling records. I think the album did 25 million copies or something. So there's no reason not to use the stuff. It's all just about the creativity. And the individuality, that's the difference. And I've been saying this since the start of the channel and before. I have a crappy out-of-tune piano. You know what's good about it? Is it's my crappy out-tune piano. And you can have your own crappy out-tune piano.
But it won't sound like yours.
Yeah, exactly. And when you I've been to Abbey Road 100 times, but when I went to Abbey Road to do that tour, they've got the two pianos there, the Hey Bulldog and the Yesterday and not Yesterday, Eleanor Rigby and the whatever. God, is it Hey Bulldog and Lady Madonna? Sorry. So they have these two very famous pianos that are very famous for those two. Dun, 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 dun. And you go in there and you play it and you're like, oh my God, that is the sound of the piano. But as you're playing it and you're standing next to it, you're like, this sounds like my crappy piano. Mm-hmm. And you suddenly realize that it's just another cheap, crappy piano that happened to play boom, dum, 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 dum.
It's got character to it.
It's got character, yeah.
Yeah.
It's got its own charisma. Mm-hmm. It can just jump out of the speakers. And Yeah, I think that's what we all need to be looking for. Today we did a video where we did because I've been harping on about this for a long time. My friend Michael Stucker is a professor at IU, and he gets his students as they're coming through doing their degree to build 1176s. And component-wise, they're super, super cheap. And he builds these, they all build an 1176 as part of their program, and they all sound really, really good. And I've been using expensive, luxury ones, vintage ones, revision A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, blah, 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 and ones that you buy from Toman, Guitar Center, or, of course, Sweetwater for, $300. And they all do a really admirable job. So today, on my own volition, I thought I actually rented some 1176s. So I got a warm one and a vintage one. I don't know what revision, I'll have to check. But anyway, one that's worth $3,500 and one that's worth a few $100s. And we did a comparison and recorded a song. And honestly, on the electric guitar, I preferred the warm one. Just what it sounded better.
I think that's valid. I've seen plenty of those shootout videos, and they're entertaining.
Yep.
But I don't think that the end answer that everyone's expecting is the, vintage original UA 1176 is going to be the be all end all, equipment.
Right.
Sometimes the budget piece wins for that song, that instrument, that day.
And that's the key right there. It's the song. Does it fit the song?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting one. We could talk about that. I know that wasn't any part of your question, but we can talk about the clone stuff. I mean, there's some clones that are just absolute disasters, where it's not about clones, it's about lookalikes. And there's some pieces of equipment where I get really disappointed that a company has made something that looks just like it, but it's terrible and doesn't sound anything like it. And then there are other ones where I'm like, it sounds really, really close, but it's, a fifth of the price, and it's just as good, but in a different way. So I'm happy to recommend it. You know what I mean? It's there's a very wide criteria, isn't there, about what is good?
Absolutely. And one of the things, so all of the stuff you're talking about is, there's a lot of it that is in the moment with the person. Does that make sense? So you are in a studio with a singer or in a studio with a guitarist. And actually, if you put it through your 1176 or your LA2A, or it doesn't, actually, in that moment, it might not matter because it's capturing that moment with that artist in that studio. And I'm not saying they don't matter, but there's a lot that you are capturing a performance. And so,
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Do you? One of the things I'm always interested in when I talk to people like yourself is how much of your thought process is about getting the most out of the artist and the performance in that moment, and how much is I want it to sound like this, or the sound is the thing that comes first, second. You say with Joe Perry, I'm guessing a lot of it is about it's a guitar in his hands, right? It's going to sound incredible because he is incredible. So how much do you sort of get into being right for the artist, and how much of you is thinking about, I want this tonal sound, I want it to shape like this, to go in this place?
I think, unfortunately, the answer is probably what you expected me to say. It's all of the above, because it really is, though. You know what I mean? You want them to be inspired, and there's so many ways to do that, and it really comes down to the situation. I was talking about this actually quite recently. I love reference tracks, and sometimes reference tracks can be the most inspiring thing to play an artist something and go, this is what I'm going for, this is what I think you could do this, you could do that. And sometimes, of course, it's the worst thing you can do because it can completely intimidate them. They're like, wait there, you want me to sing like David Bowie? No, thank you. You know what I mean? I'm not going to be able to do that. So you're playing me Freddie Mercury and you expect me to sing like that? Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. So, it's a pretty nebulous area for me. It's everything. It really is. Unfortunately, the only answer is everything. I want the sound to inspire them, especially if the guitar players. Being a guitar player myself, if the sound is not what you hear in your head, and this is where God. It sounded like I have an axe to grind here by saying this, but with a lot of this kind of scientific ways of doing things, and the outcome is the differences are not very small, so does it matter kind of result, ignores, great players and virtuosity. So if I give you a guitar, how many are guitar players here? All of you?
Yep.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, Ben, you have a guitar. You got some over
And
there.
I can see guitars behind you.
Yeah, I'm not classing myself in the guitarist category. That is not happening. I'm a drummer, so that is not happening.
So do you class? Well, you're a drummer. So do you class yourself in the music? No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. That was always one of the jokes. What do you call the guy who hangs around with musicians? Yeah. That was when I was a kid. That was always the joke.
I always got when you grow up. Now you're a drummer. When you grow up, what do you want to be? And I always said a musician. So,
well, that's the joke, isn't it? Little Johnny walking through the park with his dad, and his dad says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And little Johnny goes, "When I grow up, I want to be a musician." And his dad says, "You can't have it both ways." There's so many musicians' jokes. Yeah, but getting back to the point, I mean, it is about all of those things simultaneously, because one thing comes from the other. And if it's all about those subtleties as musicians, I was saying about being a guitar player, the subtlety of the way an instrument feels, the way it vibrates in your hand, whatever it might be, the way a pickup slightly sounds different. It can be so minuscule, the differences, but in the hands of a really skilled musician and somebody who loves their craft, those differences can be enormous. And that's, I think, I'm very unfortunate. It's what's missed in a lot of those kind of critical kind of things. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. I remember having a 335 and putting a TP6 on it, which was the shallow bridge with the fine tuners, taking off the trapeze bridge, and the sustain may have been 0.00001 second longer. Nobody told me the sustain was going to get better by having the bridge going into the block, into the wood, as opposed to kind of be hanging off a little tiny thin piece of metal across the whole body. Nobody told me the sustain was going to be improved, but I remember putting it in because I thought it was going to be easier, and I wanted to be BB King and have the fine tuners at the back because I'd seen BB play and he had it on his guitar, and I was like, I need to do that, So I did it to my 335, and I'm like playing the same guitar with the same. I think it was probably a DS1 distortion pedal going into my. Actually, in those days, I had a little Seymour Duncan convertible, 60 watt, I think it was. And I just was like, I'm getting more sustain out of this. Now, if they measured it on an oscilloscope, that's a joke, but, measured it on some kind of thing, they may have said, well, the sustain is like 0.01% better. But I noticed it. It was no. And then I was like, I really want to get some Seymour Duncan pickups. And I had the Gibson Paths that came with it. And I bought the Jeff Beck, the JB1 in the back, and the Jazz pickup in the front. And I put it in the guitar. And the tone was, again, slightly better. Was it massively different? Would it measure on the good old-fashioned oscilloscope or whatever? Probably it's like, look, you can see and that's barely anything. When you play a G chord, you can barely tell the difference. But you know what? For me as a musician, it was like life-changing, and it was noticeable, and it was different. But was it a massive amount? No, but it's those tolerances as musicians that we love. So the reason why I say that is not to complain about the endless streams of guitar videos where they say, does this matter or that does that matter, because it's only slight. It's not about that. It's about that's what goes on when you're creating sounds. That's what goes on, and that's why when everybody's going, well, records don't sound as inventive, as an interesting and individual as they used to. Well, it's because people used to have a lot more time and money in those days to sit in there for 6 weeks and craft these parts and these sounds that were phenomenal. And I think it's just a different kind of mentality, and frankly a different budget. And that's the sad thing, is that the records that we all mutually would probably agree on as being some of the best albums ever recorded, some of them may have been recorded in a couple of days. Of course that happens, raw kind of performance-based records, but a lot of them had weeks and sometimes months of love put into them to make beautiful sounding records where they weren't afraid to track something and then throw half of it away and start again. I've tracked when we did You Found Me, the first single off the second Fray album, we retracked the drums for the chorus in a different studio.
And was that because you just weren't happy with what you got from the first take, or was that a sort of more conscious decision of, we want to try something different? It's not you knew it was wrong. It's just
no. The groove had changed on the piano. Isaac didn't have a chorus. He had I found God in the corner of First and Amistad, and the chorus wasn't there yet, and so when he wrote the chorus, he had the chord sequence in the chorus, but he's written now, he's put a lyric in there, and so he's doing a different push and pull on the piano. So we're like, we should retrack the piano. So of course we retracked the piano, so it felt better with the new vocal idea. And now it's like, but the drum part isn't quite there now. It's pushing here and it's pulling there. We should make that push go to Rust and insecure. You found me. I'm at the door. Where were you? And it's just, it has a looseness and a groove that wasn't there on the other drum part. So we retracked the drums, and that's just kind of what you do. But if you're in a situation where you are now, where we're all forced to be too often, where it's kind of like, well, we haven't got time, it's done, move on, let's do something else. I mean, that's a sad thing. And every time I hear myself talking about these kinds of things, I don't want to sound like the old boomer guy complaining about how life isn't as good as it used to be. I mean, that stuff, it sucks, the wagging finger, 70s music is better than now. And, God, this whole massive channels dedicated to that belief system. And it's just not true. It's not true at all. And, but what was great was budgets and time to experiment. And so, like any kind of Malcolm Gladwell way of looking at the world, you just have to think, well, how can I create that for myself? How can I, when Gladwell talks about how all of the tech billionaires all were born in the same area, all went to the same college, all learned Java at exactly the same time, and are all now billionaires. It's no accident. They're all given this incredible opportunity to be programming 20 years before anybody else thought it was important. And that's not an accident. So he tells you this kind of stuff because he's like, you have to make your own luck. You have to look at these things. He says, yeah, you know what? If you think that these people have more advantages to you because they're coming from wealthy families, you're right. They do. But not all of them take it up, and not all of them have the work ethic. But you can work hard. They have the advantages, but most of them don't take it. As I'm sure you're aware, big companies, entrepreneurial stuff, it's actually quite rare that it comes from a very wealthy kid that had every opportunity. It usually comes from somebody who didn't even complete high school, let alone college. So these are the things that I think that we have to remember. Yes, it sucks that we don't have $400,000 to make an album anymore. It sucks. The same rock record that would have been made for $400,000 in 1995 might be, if you're lucky, from a label, $30,000.
Wow.
So you've now got to go into, Sunset Sound and go, okay, I need 3 days to track drums and basics here. And then I'm going to go back to my studio and take the rest of the budget and just spread it over a month or two in my home studio environment and make a record like that. Every producer who's honest about it will tell you that's what they do, that's what's going on, and that's okay. But, if you're skilled and you've been doing this long enough, if it's not working and you need to go back to Sunset Sound for a day to retrack 2 tracks on drums, that's what you do. It just comes down to working at a high level of understanding where you can make these decisions and budget for them. We used to be blessed because we'd hang out in $2,000 a day studios for 6 weeks, going, if it didn't work tomorrow, we'll try it again. It didn't work today, we'll try it again tomorrow. We were blessed for that. It's not like that anymore, but that's okay. Now it forces you to actually be better at your job, or at least be mindful and focused on what you're doing.
And do you think we'll ever see the death of the big studios?
Well, I think to be blunt, I think all of the ones that probably should have died, with a few that shouldn't have died that did die as well. Like Olympic going was just an absolute disaster. Some of these classic studios have made some of the greatest albums of all time. But a lot of the sort of peripheral studios, there was a natural kind of culling, that just was going to happen, because if there's a lot of studios and not a lot of work, then that's just what's going to happen. But with the studios with the legacy and the quality and everything, they're still there. They're still kicking. In LA, the main legacy studios still exist. Sunset Sound's still a very popular studio. East West is still a very popular studio. They've all got great pedigrees. The ones that have closed down actually got nothing to do with how busy or popular were. They have other interests in there. Because they might be owned by big corporations that look at very expensive real estate in major cities and go, we'd be better off, better off making it into something else, or knocking it down and turning it into an apartment building.
The land is way more valuable than the studio sitting on it.
And I think I think you're right about the sort of real high end legacy studios. I mean, I've been in Studio 2. Into Abbey Road Studios, into the Beatles studio, and you walk in the door. I know this is going to sound ludicrous, but you walk in the door, and there is something special about that room. It is not. Yeah, you don't walk in. You would not walk in and feel uninspired.
Yeah,
and I think that you're probably right. That's where those kind of studios, your East Wests, your Blackbird, your Abbey Road, the artists will always want to go there, because you walk in the door and go, wow, okay.
Yeah, I think the ones with the legacy, East West definitely, Abbey Road by far, yeah. The main two rooms, 1 and 2. When we did the Abbey Road video, somebody said to me, it's only because of the Beatles that the studio exists now.
Come on.
And I understand the Beatles were huge. But I said, well, actually, Abbey Road is booked out 2 years in advance. Both the main rooms are booked out 2 years in advance, all with film projects, all with scoring. That's where everybody scores. That's where, ever since like Star Wars and all the other major movies were done there, that's where every major person, and that's since before then, because back in the 30s, when it first started, it was the first real proper recording studio, professional recording studio in the world. Alan Blumlein invented stereo there in the 30s. So, it's got a legacy, that's insane. But yes, as much as we know the Beatles had a big part of it, without the Beatles, they were busy. With the Beatles, they were busy. And since the Beatles, they're busy. Its legacy is going to be there forever. And I think that that's true of all of those major studios that have been around for a certain period of time. Now, like, again, who's to know whether that the actual owner of the property is going to pull the plug because of extra money they could make? That's a whole other discussion,
Yeah. I think I'm aware we've sort of taken up a good chunk of your evening. One of the things I just wanted to touch on was, it goes back to this whole, you get less time in the studio, and albums are done on lower budgets. Presumably, and I say presumably, being able to do that in the box has been a big help in having less time. Has that made your studio life quicker and easier by being able to do a lot in the box? Because obviously there's a big debate about in the box or analog days, and we did it on tape before. As someone who remembers 2-inch 16-track and cutting and splicing, please don't ever go back to that. But just gave my age away slightly. But yeah, presumably in the box has been a big help in that respect of being able to recall quickly, or has it not changed your process at all, really?
Well, it's certainly fostered the idea of, we'll just fix the sounds later, right? Record it and we'll throw it through all the plugins and stuff, and we'll do it later. We don't have to think about it now.
I think that, I think you're both right. Yes. To your point, Nate, it has changed the mentality quite dramatically, or at least reinforced I don't know what the right word is. Reinforced a negative work ethic. I
was going to say like a bad habit.
Habit, yeah.
Like you had to create a new discipline to yourself, right? Because before you had just 8 tracks, or you had just this, right? And now you've got unlimited tracks. You have unlimited plugins.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think at the end of the day, the track count, I don't think has been a problem for 50 years, because there was 16 tracks by the end of the 60s. There was 24 tracks by the early 70s. So it's been 50 plus years before that's actually been an issue or anything that really mattered. So I think we're good there. I think it's more a case of as Nate was intimating, more of a case of that idea of like, oh, it doesn't matter because we'll be able to fix it anyway. I do miss the days of when you used to walk into a studio, record, and then come in and listen and go, oh, I need to lay back on that section, or you need to follow me here, or I need to change the bass line here because the kick's playing something different. What are you doing? All of that. I miss that sort of interactivity, and then going back in and recutting it and getting that moment where like you lock together. Like it was our job, when we were tracking records to sort of like make it work between us. There wasn't a right or wrong. There was that's not true. The right was, does it sound good? It wasn't a case of like, you're wrong because you're not playing exactly to the grid. It's a very different kind of mentality. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm very wary of that grid conversation, because I had a video come out today that Gavin put out on Instagram, which is really good, Gavin Heverstick. And he took my conversation about gridding stuff. And I think that what I was talking about was an article I'd read with Andy Wallace in the late 90s, who was starting to get, records on Pro Tools. And he said the problem with getting records on Pro Tools now is they sound smaller. So everybody was like, oh, yeah, it's because of digital this and digital that. And he's like, no, it's not because it's digital. It's because now everybody can see when everything's in time. So like the one now is like, where it used to be, grah, grah. Now it's like, pat, pat, gang, gang. Everybody's like, da, 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 da. Because like every transient can be exactly on the same beat. So regardless of grid, it was just a fact that now everything could be really tight. When it used to be, tight was, does it sound big and fat? And I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I was told that, that when a kick drum played, the bass guitar had to be after the initial attack. You had the snap of it, and then it was boom. Now, there was not that perceptible thing that I just added for effect. It was nanoseconds, but basically the attack came from the kick drum hitting, the sustain came from the of the bass. And if you wanted urgency in the track, especially on like kind of kind of rhythms, the guitar was slightly early against the kick and snare. So, and so that was like the ultimate kind of groove thing, is that you had this kind of kick on, bass slightly late, guitar slightly early. There was even the Motown discussion where a bass could be flat but never sharp, and a guitar could be sharp but never flat. And so they were just like, the whole idea was like, if the bass was slightly flat, it would add weight to it. And if the guitar was slightly sharp, and I'm talking about slightly, it would add urgency. All these things that when you listen to these classic records are in there in spades, that now is just like, everything's perfect. Now, I remember being recording my first kind of quartet and stuff in the late 90s and orchestral stuff, and thinking, God, these guys don't know how to play in tune. Because I was so used to like everything being so in tune, like tuning everything. We were doing records where we would like take guitar chords and tune for each chord. So you'd play that, and because a major third sounds better when it's slightly flat, you'd sit there and tune that major third slightly flat until it sounded perfectly in tune with the rest of it. And you would do this, and you get these whole sections where I remember doing like 4-chord sequence where we're going to go through the song and just play the one chord. So G, 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 sit out, sit out, sit out, sit out, G, 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 and then go, okay, we're going to quit tune for the C, and all this stuff. And then you come and do the orchestral stuff on it, and you're like, oh, they're a little pitchy, And then you learn about, well, I'd already knew, but, equal temperament, that when you go up a scale, it's one way, and when you go down a scale, it's another way. It's C sharp going up and D flat going down. And C sharp and D flat are two different notes. And Bach came along and did this thing called equal temperament and said, somewhere in the middle between C sharp and D flat, we're going to call it one note. And we're going to approximate the two things together. And so all of this stuff, classical musicians understand. And we're all in this world of like frets and, you know, keys and stuff like that, which are all like approximations of it. So that latitude, my waffling on is just to say that latitude in timing, that latitude in pitch, that latitude in everything is what made music sound so big and fat and huge. And now we're getting everything a little bit smaller because it's all starting to be exactly in tune, exactly in time. But then what does in tune and in time mean?
Right. Well,
that's a deep conversation.
It kind of takes out the humanity of it, really, if you make it too perfect or if you make it too in tune, right? But even naturally, the notes are not the fourths and the fifths. They're not perfect, or the thirds and.
We were driving to Brighton, my wife and I, a couple of days ago. We were driving to Brighton, and that track, Leona Lewis track, "Bleeding Love," came on the radio. Keep bleeding, keep bleeding. And I remember when that came out, I can't remember, was it about 15 years ago, 10 or 15 years ago? It seemed like the most perfect pop song. It seemed so perfect and like so modern sounding. Listen to it now. If you haven't heard it in 10 years, that's better. Listen to it now and you're like, wow, it's actually quite rough. It's quite raw. But it's all context. At the time, it seemed perfect. It seemed like, wow, this is what we should be heading. This is like, God, this is so pristine and so well sung and so timed and so everything. But compared with the way modern pop music is now, like I said, it sounds more like Iggy and the Stooges now. I'm joking, but you'll see what I mean. If you go back and listen to it, you're going to hear you'll be going to hear like, wow, there's no way they would have, if that was a Beyonce track, and no disrespect to Beyonce, she's amazing, but if that was a Beyonce track, all the backgrounds would be vocal lined. Everything would be like, perfect.
Yeah.
And now, of course, you go back to Leona Lewis and you're like, her background vocals are superb, but they're a little slightly bit wrong.
Yeah.
I didn't hear it before because I didn't listen to music that was so perfect that I would have noticed that or would have cared about it, probably more importantly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's, I mean, I love the fact there are still artists who, you know, it's famously that Adele doesn't auto-tune anything. And I know that she's brilliant. So there's probably not a lot to do anyway, but the fact that some of it is not perfect makes it perfect.
Well,
I love that.
I mean,
I love that. Just
I think there's lots of answers to that because, and I agree with you, and I totally understand, and I'm not even going to fight you on that being a reality. But you know, if you're working with a really good producer and you know what you're doing, you're getting in there. You're going, hey, we need to get this line, we need to get this word, we need to punch in here, we need to fly this bit. I mean, unless you're an absolutely dreadful singer. Like dreadful, you should be able to get a really great vocal take by just doing good old-fashioned work at it and have, most importantly, a producer who knows when something is good and can focus on it. Because I used to do a lot of sessions as an engineer with very mediocre producers, some of which got very successful, and you would just sit there like doing take after take after take. And you're like, you need to give the artist, you know, I'm engineering, and like, you need to give the artist some direction. You clearly don't know that guy or girl is sharp here. You're just saying, oh, it's not quite right. Let's do it again. It's like, you know.
And then the singer's going to blow out their voice. And then
the singer's going to blow out their voice.
And then you're not going to get the good take anyways. So
yeah, and then I would come back the next morning and sit there with like 47, takes of the second verse. And go through and be like the same. Oh, that one's slightly better. The same. That one's slightly better. And then I have to then comp. Where when I work with like David Foster, David told me that he's only ever done 10 takes with any vocalist. And he said, as a producer, if you're doing more than 10 takes, you clearly have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you're not ready yet.
Yeah. And it's just like you need to know what to tell them to sing. It can't just be like, let's do another one. Do you know how many times I heard that? That was great. Let's do another one.
Well, if it's great, why are we doing another one?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never got that.
I said on a previous version of the podcast, I've only worked in a few recording studios, been lucky enough to work in some nice ones, that kind of thing, some really good ones. And the thing that surprised me, the day I walked in the first recording studio I ever went into, I went in with the view of, what am I doing here? I don't know what I'm doing. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to. And the engineer was the most positive person I've ever met. He was never like, oh yeah, that's not very. It was like, yeah, that was really good, but the chorus with drumming in the chorus was a little bit delayed. Can we just try and pull it forward? There was no negativity in that room at all, and that was the bit that I really took away, was the difference that a good producer or whoever you're working with, engineer, can make to you in that moment is immense. As to how you
absolutely, the big thing I'd always say was. I always tell people this is find what you like about something and ask somebody to do more of that.
Yeah.
If you played a great second verse, go, hey, I love the groove that you played on these 4 bars here in the second verse. Give me more of that. As opposed to, because if somebody sings or plays a track down, drums a track, sings a track down, and you go and say 90% of it was crap, it's totally demoralizing. But if you find the 10% that you liked and say, give me more of that, it's a much better way of going. But I've experienced both of those extremes. All the great producers know how to get performances out. And but then I've heard stories, there's a story about Roger Waters working with Jeff Beck. And I can't remember. I think it's What God Wants. There's like 2 parts of it or something, and there's a solo on it, which is one of the greatest guitar solos ever in the history of the world. And the story goes, this is Jeff didn't tell me this story. It was one of Jeff's friends who told me it. I didn't have the balls when I met Jeff to ask him about this story. But one of his friends told me that that Roger basically was not getting the solo he wanted, and he just was like, call yourself the bloody best guitar player in the world. Everybody thinks you're amazing, and like humiliate him. So he had him basically in tears. I don't know if that's true or not, but one of our mutual friends said that was the truth. And you go and listen to it. It is mind-bogglingly beautiful. That just one of the greatest guitar solos you're ever going to hear. So I'm not saying you need to do that every time, but probably in the right hands, especially an artist to an artist. But when you're a producer, you have a different kind of job. You're there to get the performances and stuff like that, but you're also there. You're also there to educate and help, and most importantly, the word isn't as used as much as it used to was used overly. Empower. You want to empower artists. Quite often, I always do 2 or 3 albums with every artist I've ever worked with, which is a good thing. So they come back, and by the second album, I may have half rewritten their first album. I may have changed stuff. Sometimes I'm credited, sometimes I'm not. But I may have got in there and really done a lot of rewriting and reworking of all the songs. By the time they're coming for the second album, I'm doing 1/10 of that because I've shown them some stuff and I've helped them develop better. So when they come in for the second album, they come in far more prepared, even though the joke is you spend your whole life recording your first album, writing your first album, even though they've had hardly any time between their first and second. When they come in on the second, they've had this massive experience where you've really helped guide them and you've empowered them. And they come in, boom, 1 level up. Excuse me. And that's what you should be doing.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you should be doing. So it's,
amazing.
God bless it.
Amazing.
Well, I think you've shown us how to produce like a pro.
Yeah.
I'll show myself out.
I'll get my coat. Ben knows that one.
Yeah,
I'll just get my coat.
Well, look, I think the 3 of us can't thank you enough for your time, taking the time out of your evening to do this. I appreciate you're probably
marvellous.
Busy.
Where are you in Newbury?
Yeah, I'm just outside Newbury. So that's me.
Are you in a village too?
Yeah, windy. And
yep, I'm in a windy village as well.
Trees howling around.
Black. It's gone completely dark now. Yeah,
it sure is. I think for me, I think the videos you've done around some of the studios have been amazing for Produce Like a Pro. The one, I think we all grew up the same as you. That Queen and Led Zeppelin and those kind of bands are legendary for a reason. So the more people shine a light on why they were legendary. And I think a lot of it does come down to, for me, it comes down to, I remember seeing, very quick tangent, somebody once time-aligned John Bonham's drums. And it's like, why would you listen to that? I mean, it was...
They probably disappeared.
Everything that made it incredible from a drummer's point of view is now gone.
Well, I saw that time-aligned video, which I thought was comical, but it was done as to you don't need to do it.
Correct.
And everybody was outraged, but the point was nobody actually had ever done that or wanted to do it. It's one of those.
But modern drummers do get time aligned a lot.
Those answers that no one asked the question to.
Yeah, no one asked the question. Yeah, how many videos do you want? I love this. I've watched so many videos. I'm sure you have as well. Like busting myths, and like I've been doing this my whole bloody life. All I've done is music since I was 16 years old, and I'm like, I've worked with everybody in every studio on multiple levels as a manager, a producer, an artist, an engineer, an A&R guy, a blah, 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 a session guitar, you name it, I've done it. I've run recording studios and rehearsal studios. And I'm like, this is this myth. And I'm like, no, it isn't. I've never heard that. Nobody talks like that. But it's a good thing to pretend that it's a myth because it sounds really like, yeah, those people, they don't know what they're talking about, I have no idea where some of this stuff comes up with. Well, I know. I mean, because it's a way of getting views.
It's the clickbait, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. It's pretty funny. All right, you all rock. Thank you ever so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Warren. Really appreciate it.
No, my wife says hi.
My wife walked in, so she's wandered out, and now she's gone out to see one of her friends. So that's it. She'll be back later when the wine's finished.
The wine that you're drinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved every second of it. I think.
Thank you ever so much. Thanks for letting me waffle on as per usual.
Fantastic. Thanks, Warren. Have a great evening.
Thanks,
You
Warren.
guys rock. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you for listening to Sound Discussion. Your hosts are Ben Holmes, Neil Merchant, and me, Nate Kelms. Our theme song is composed and recorded by Jojo Timmerman. You can find us on the internet at sounddiscussionpodcast.com, or you can drop us a line at sounddiscussionpodcast@gmail.com. Additional show notes for this episode can be found on our website or in the description area of your podcast player. A big thank you to our guest for taking the time to chat with us today, and to you, the listener, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be part of our discussion. We look forward to having you join us again next month on another episode of Sound Discussion.
Don't want to sound like the old boomer guy complaining about how life isn't as good as it used to be. I mean, that stuff, it sucks.